visas.
Well, so what we just talked about the Americans pulling back, that was all happening even before the pandemic. It was happening before Russia invaded Ukraine. Now you have a whole set of other issues that are going to arise from Russia invading Ukraine. So the world's biggest exporter of grains just invaded the world's fifth biggest
Okay,
exporter of grains,
Yeah.
right? That's going to mean something for global food prices.
Yeah.
Also, between 4 and 5 million barrels of oil per day out of 100 that we consume globally on a daily basis are about to come offline because the Russians won't be able to export. I mean, they this is a complicated story because, you know, it goes in pipes out of Russia. And so if they can't get it shipped out, then those pipes get clogged up and then you have to close the wells in Siberia. And if you do that, you know, it takes a long time to reopen. So anyway, we're going to have an energy crisis and we're going to have a food price crisis. And if you remember, back in 2011, there was something called the Arab Spring. The reason we had the Arab Spring to begin with was a tripling in food prices because they had a bad harvest in Siberia that year. Basically, it's a little more complicated than that, a little bit simplified. I think we're going to see a quadrupling of food prices this year. And of course, that is going to have a huge amount of consequences on especially the North African countries, many countries in the Middle East, probably going to have a second Arab Spring. Maybe we'll call it something else this time around. East Asians are going to have trouble getting enough energy. So it's going to be quite the ride. So try to think of, you know, what are the regions of the world that you want access to in the coming decade, the coming several decades, because we're not going back to the old normal. I really don't think so. I think 2019 was the most normal year we'll see in a long time.
Yeah, I think that is that's how it's shaping now. And so then people that can try to safeguard their future, they will look into migration or investment migration. And then that brings us back to our line of work, which is investment migration.
Right.
So I often see you posting amazing posts, by the way, on LinkedIn, bringing up articles from the media that are often scrutinizing citizenship by investments programs, especially in the EU. Do you think these programs are receiving a fair judgment from the media?
In short, no, I don't think they are. I think that there are many other types of immigration that are much bigger concern than citizenship or residence by investment. Because out of all the kinds of immigration that takes place, all the categories of immigration, this is the most closely scrutinized, most closely watched, controlled, checked. So it's the least problematic route into Europe, right? In 2020, you had 700,000 plus naturalizations of non-EU citizens, right? And less than 1 in 1,000 of those were through citizenship by investment. But that's what gets all the focus. And I think it's people have I don't know if it's a natural skepticism toward anything having to do with wealth and privilege. I think that it's easy for politicians to score political points by targeting people who have more money. And people are just naturally skeptical of that to begin with. And so when you hear about this, multiple passports, people think like a Jason Bourne type of scenario, right? But I think it's unwarranted because it's the most secure channel, and it's super helpful for so many countries. You're bringing in capital that's unencumbered. That's money that the state doesn't have to raise through taxes. It doesn't have to raise through printing more currency, issuing more debt. So it's a fantastic source of capital. and it's unfairly maligned, in my opinion.
Yeah. And there's also we also need to bring up another perspective that the applicant is heavily investigated. So, because there are allegations of corruption and so on. But we also, sorry, there was another point I was going to bring. So do you think this is happening because there is a lack of transparency in some countries? Because take the example of Portugal, for instance, they do every month CEF, which is like the International Service of Estrangeiros e Fronteiras, every month publish the number of residencies given and nationalities. I think Malta is also very good at giving that information.
Yeah.
Do you think other member states maybe could be a bit more transparent? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are those two countries that you mentioned. So the SEF in Portugal and the Office of the Regulator of the GCES in Malta.
In Malta, yeah.
They're very good at releasing reports. So in Portugal, the SEF does it every single month. In Malta, they do it once a year, but it's a huge 78-page report full of details, so full disclosure. Those are kind of the best-in-class examples for that type of transparency. I think that there are typically three criticisms that are levied against investment migration, three categories. They fall into one of three baskets. So one is the moral argument, which is,
of course.
Wealth shouldn't buy privilege at all. That's kind of a philosophical question. And if people disagree with that, it's kind of, if people think that people with money shouldn't have any privileges, like if they shouldn't be able to stay in nicer hotel rooms or fly business class, whatever. Sure, we can have that discussion. I disagree. That's a philosophical question. The second argument is the security argument. So, there's a back door into Europe. It's really not a back door. It's the front door.
It's the front door.
It's the front door, and it's like all the lights there, all the cameras, right? Red carpet, front, definitely the front door, right? The back door would be like, if you really want the back door into Europe, you can pay some Lithuanian student to marry you, right? And get in that way. It's much easier, far fewer controls. And then the third argument is the one having to do with a lack of transparency. It's opaque, right? And that's the one where I would say it holds water a little bit. Like there is some merit to that argument. And it's also the one that's the easiest for investment migration itself to fix by being more transparent, right? So we could just be more transparent and then take away that argument. But right now, I think we're not being transparent enough, and that gives ammunition to our critics, I would say. And so there are some good examples. SEF is an excellent example here in Portugal. In Malta, they do a good job, although not the residency program of Malta is not the same. Then in the Caribbean, Antigua used to do a good job. They're not releasing any statistics for the last 2 years, so I'm very disappointed at that. I've requested it a number of times. Grenada does a pretty good job, at least on the number side, although they say nothing about the nationalities. And then, St. Lucia does probably the best job in the Caribbean. They do a once a year thing. But then there are many, many programs that don't release any statistics at all, and that's a big shame.
And that's, listen to your podcast, The Mobility Standard, and I heard you coined the term independent means visa, which we hope it picks up because it's a very good term. So let's go and use a hashtag here. I'm joking. But that brings me to our next point, because there is a myth that only the super rich can invest in passports, and not in passports, but in investment migration, sorry. And stats say the totally opposite. Maybe not the totally opposite, but that's not really the truth. And here at Global Citizen Solutions, we also have, we see a lot of, we see families, we see digital nomads that are independently applying to a way to get into another country. or maybe a better quality of life for any reason. So my question is, who do you think are the new global citizens investing in investment migration?
I think the new global citizens are all those people who have recently discovered that they needn't be tied to a particular geographical area to make money. And now they are able to move and make money from wherever they find themselves. And so a lot of them say, well, why shouldn't I go and live on the beach in Costa Rica, right? Why shouldn't I go and take a sabbatical in Lisbon, right? I think to a great extent, those are the new, this is the new market for investment migration. And it's not necessarily investment, right? You brought up independent means visas, which technically there's no investment there. It's about you demonstrating I have sufficient funds to maintain myself. Let me in, and I won't be a burden on the state, right?
So let's give an example. Is it like the D7 visa in Portugal?
So in Portugal, you have the D7. In Spain, you have the non-lucrative visa. In Italy, you have something called elective residency. You have a whole host of these programs in Latin America. They're all over Latin America and Europe and Asia. And they don't, typically what you have to do is you have to either demonstrate a certain minimum amount of savings.
Okay.
Independent means, right?
Yeah.
Or
net assets.
Net savings, net assets, or regular income. Okay. Typically a passive income. And so just show that you're someone who won't need, you won't need to hold down a job, or like you won't need to get a job in Portugal. You won't need to rely on the Portuguese government for money, anything like that. So if you can demonstrate that to the satisfaction of the authorities, then they will give you a visa. Now, there's no investment, so I wouldn't call it exactly investment migration, but it is based on capital in some way.
Yes.
What was different about investment migration was that you could obtain the document, whether that was a residence permit or a citizenship, even being absent physically, right? So you invested, and that's why you didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
So you got the citizenship or you got the residence permit, even though you were living somewhere else, and you got it because you invested. Because the government wants something in return for granting you the citizenship or residency. With independent means visas, it's different. The government still wants something in return. They don't want your investment necessarily. That's what golden visas and citizenship by investment is for. What they want is for you to typically to become a tax resident and to spend at least half the year there and spend your disposable income there, right? And so the government feels like, okay, that's your economic contribution for an independent means visa. Don't have to invest, just pay your taxes here, spend your money here, and you're still welcome, right? Yeah. And so there are so many of those available. Now, in the past, people didn't want to move. Like the Chinese didn't necessarily want to move, the Americans didn't want to move, the Brazilians didn't necessarily want to move. They wanted the option to move, and that's why they got golden visas, citizenship by investment, also for improved mobility, of course, for citizenships. But after the pandemic, so many people have discovered that, you know what, I can do all this stuff online, remotely.
From Portugal, Spain,
wherever. Why am I sitting here, paying $10,000 a month for my apartment in Manhattan when I could be living in a palace in, Jamaica or whatever, right? And so those people. And I think a lot of the people who previously went for golden visas, and Andre Botma pointed this out when he was on our podcast, he pointed out in South Africa, a lot of the people who, a few years ago in South Africa would have applied for a golden visa, now they're saying, why don't I actually want to move, so why don't I just get a D7 visa instead in Portugal, right? So I think that's something that's new. Also, of course, the big thing was the rise of Western interest in investment migration. So prior to the pandemic, I mean, the American market was not that big for investment migration. And now we're seeing, Portugal last year, only the Chinese applied to more golden visas than the Americans,
the Americans,
right?
yeah.
And we're seeing the same trend all over the world, like the rise of the American investor migrant. It's a huge trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Americans, they often also, they're looking for lifestyle. And we see here with Global Citizen Solutions, they do, so we have the Americans, but we also have the Brits
Yeah.
that want that way back into the Schengen. So I think, do you think that has forced investment migration companies to look into the D7, not only D7, sorry, the independent means visa all over and bring it to their portfolios, because that could be one of the the feature of migration.
Sure. I think